we'll get her back on. But maybe before I jump into it, just wanted to say thanks again to the NARUC team for helping to organize the workshop. Was it 2 weeks ago now? The Transportation Electrification Planning Workshop as part of the annual meeting. I heard it was really great, so really excited for folks who were able to join, and hopefully we can share some of those outcomes in one of the future meetings here. One of the things we as DOE wanted to highlight is the importance of hosting capacity maps to help accelerate the deployment of EV charging by leveraging the capacity on the grid. So understanding where there's headroom that we can put in more charging stations, help with site selection in a way that avoids some of the additional grid upgrades. And so we have been developing a website that we're hoping to publish in the next few weeks that provides some background on hosting capacity maps, what they are, how they can be used, and then provides links so that folks can find those more easily. We have a nice graphic here showing states that have publicly available maps. You'll notice that several are green. There's numerous utilities in several of those states that have links to hosting capacity maps. And so, as I mentioned before, it's an important tool. We recognize it's not the end all. It doesn't replace the need to engage with utilities, but it is a way to inform the site selection process to places that have that headroom. And it can, in doing so, reduce costs so that you don't have to bring additional grid resources to the table. And then finally, we think that it's really important because it provides a level playing field by having this information available. And again, we recognize it's not the perfect tool, but really making sure that everyone has access to that information. We know that there are some stakeholders and some entities that are very sophisticated, that have the technical know-how and can figure these resources out. They have the existing relationships with the utilities and can really figure out where that best site selection is. But really trying to bring information to all stakeholders by making sure it's transparent. But to do that, we know that we also, at the same time, we need to make it publicly available, but also improve the hosting capacity maps in and of themselves. So we're exploring different ways that we may be able to reduce some of the staff time that is required in updating and maintaining these resources, and that better reflects the real-time conditions. So for example, some of the projects that are in the queue don't reflect in a static hosting capacity map. And so there are some advanced methods where you could detect new resources that are being added to the grid so that you could update this in real time, update the hosting capacity map in real time. And so there are ways to get that better, but one of the first steps we wanted to do is just to showcase where you could find these maps and make it easy to find. So we're going to be posting this. If you have additional resources, we'd love to add your state to this map, and happy to keep this updated over time and work with you all to increase this data availability. So with that, maybe, and I can't see anybody anymore, so I don't know who's here, but I'll turn it back over to Danielle.
Thank you, Kara. That is very exciting, and I'm sure will be frequently referenced. I believe that Sejal thinks her microphone is working, so let's try to go back to Sejal.
Thanks, Danielle. Apologies all. I hope you can hear me now.
We can. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, I can't see much, but I will work with this. So I set up the, my reason for wanting to discuss hosting capacity maps today and in general across the U.S. is we're accelerating the adoption of EVs. It's going across all of the duty types, from light duty, private commercial fleets, transit fleets. And then there's multiple opportunities for funding for charging stations, EVSEs, across the federal, the state, regional, and even electric utility levels. So there is a need really to discuss it in that perspective. Next slide, I just wanted to provide an overview a few examples of the federal programs that the Joint Office is involved in that provide charging station funding, from the Clean School Bus Program, which is for about $5 billion, the Low No Emission Grant Program for Transit, that's an additional $5.6 billion, the Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Grant Program, that's $2.5 billion, and the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, which is $5 billion. I can't tell if the slides are moving, so please someone stop me if I'm going too fast or across. Thank you. The notes for these all provide funding towards EVSEs. The school bus, the CFI, and the NEVI programs are 5-year programs. The Low No program is an ongoing program. It existed before the other 3 and will exist after, most likely. The NEVI program that you all may have heard of, but most recently 10 states have contracts or agreements in place to begin construction on chargers. 18 additional states have solicitations out, RFPs, RFQs, whichever alphabet soup you want to attribute, is out there, and that's about $119 million in public conditional awards have been made. Next slide, please. Can you, sorry, someone speaking? Oh, okay. Next slide, please. So how do the hosting capacity maps relate to the funding opportunities? And this is, I will relate this to the NEVI program. And in the NEVI, the 51, 52 plans that we've received, 99% of the NEVI state plans require available electric capacity as part of the solicitation response. So every single developer for every single site will go to an electric utility and say, hey, is there enough electric capacity for this site for my project to succeed? And that has to be submitted, either a form or some sort of narrative, as part of that bid response. And right next to that, I've written each site is probably going to have multiple developers. So each electric utility is going to get multiple requests to do that assessment in a very limited time, because some of these solicitations are a few months, maybe, in response back. Some as small as 2 to 3 months, some as large as 6 months. And then some state DOTs have actually gone and had the resources to be able to connect with their electric utilities and get that capacity information, use it as part of their solicitations, and include it so that the bidders themselves don't have to do it, but it's there and it's static. But utilities are still being asked for that information because it's not available. And this is where the hosting capacity maps really come into play, because that provides that information available and no one's really going to look for it. It's available. The issue on the other side that I've written as well is you're gonna have to, these are 5-year programs. So for every single solicitation, these are gonna have to get updated. And that's where I think the hosting capacity maps being available is a huge thing. And this is just one example for one funding. You're looking at these types of solicitations across federal, state, regional levels, and you're going to get these, they may cross applications potentially, but you're getting multiple requests for one site. And that's the message I really want to send, is that this is going to be, I think it's going to get more exacerbated as more of these NEVI programs pick up, because we're hearing that a few of our states are actually ready to go out for their second solicitations. So I just want to end it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Sejal. That seems like really important context for the work that our members care about and the rest of the conversation today. I'm going to hand things back over to Commissioner Paratic, the chair of the EV working group at this point.
Thanks, Danielle, and thanks for getting things kicked off today as well. And thanks for to both Kara and Sejal for the presentations. I think this is a really good overview and important for us to stay abreast of as we're moving forward with the NEVI programs. And actually, I know in Michigan we have we've been thinking a lot about these. You notice that Michigan is not green on this map right here, but we've been thinking a lot about this and have some work ongoing to in one of our work groups to hopefully rectify that and make some progress for the state of Michigan here at least. So yeah, I really enjoyed both of those presentations, so thanks. But next, we have a presentation from Alex Young of National Grid, who's going to talk to us about the various maps that exist and the value and limitations of each as he sees it. So Alex, I'm going to pass it off to you.
Great, thank you. Can everybody hear me?
We can hear you,
Yes.
but we just see a black screen.
Okay, I had a feeling that would be the case. Everybody else's cameras are black, so I had a feeling mine wouldn't work, but I'll try toggling it one more time, but otherwise I don't want to hold it up. So thanks for the introduction.
Bring for Thanksgiving. Caramel apple cider mule. Let me show you how to make it. 2 cups of
Okay, so thank you for the introduction. So as stated, my name's Alex Young. I'm an engineer at National Grid. I'm part of our integrated planning and solutions team. I am responsible for creating and maintaining our system data portal and really any electric data that we share on there. I've been at National Grid for about 2 years, so not a huge background, and actually the system data portal came around before I joined the team, but I can definitely speak to it here nonetheless. So if we go to the next slide. So just wanted to give a brief history of the system data portal. So really a lot of utilities or even just commissions will refer to hosting capacity maps as kind of the main product that utilities produce, really just advertising capacity of the electric system. The system data portal is really just something that we have created as part of the New York State Reforming the Energy Vision Initiative, or REV initiative, that came around in 2014. There was a joint utilities group that was formed, which is really just a conglomerate of the electric utilities in New York State, and we decided that we would try to standardize the products that we're delivering, the information that we're presenting, and we came up with this idea of a system data portal. It's really a public-facing website or portal where all this electric data can be found. So on there, we do include various hosting capacity maps, as well as many public filed company reports, a few other reports that stakeholders have asked us for that we've deemed safe to share publicly. So we really just kind of grouped this all together into a system data portal. And the graphic at the bottom kind of shows a brief history of the stages and how this has evolved over time. So as I mentioned, in 2014, this sort of kick-started the utilities beginning to figure out how we could best share this type of information with the public, specifically developers, to advance state policy goals. New York State has set some pretty aggressive policy goals for connecting renewable energy. And to facilitate that, we decided that sharing this information publicly would help with the interconnection process, or that was the intent. Really, the focus here is distribution level connected resources. So nothing really transmission, nothing sensitive like that. But still, we have big goals for connecting distribution level resources and generation. So really, it kind of started out in 2016 with just some high level indicators of, I was told it was sort of like a heat map. So red means don't apply here. There aren't many any opportunities for additional connections, or we're kind of at capacity. That has since evolved over time because as with sharing any data publicly, typically the more granular, the better, right? A lot of these maps are used to properly cite or get an idea of the best places to site generation resources, or really any load resources like EV chargers. So the more granular data we can provide, the better. So that's really kind of the evolution over the years, has been adding additional granularity to these maps, trying to meet use cases as stakeholders bring them up. So we went from this heat map back in 2016 to what was eventually a hosting capacity analysis. So that was a much more thorough analysis where we actually look at constraints on the grid. So engineering level constraints, the same things we would consider in the interconnection process, like under voltage, over voltage, thermal device ratings, anti-islanding concerns, all of those engineering considerations we would assess for every circuit and share that on a map. There was a need to share additional data, right? Because sharing just capacity is great when you publish a map, but the grid is always evolving. There's always new projects being connected. So sharing additional system data was seen as another important value add of these maps. So we started to integrate a DG queue, so really generation queue. A load queue is actually something we are still looking to implement. We have not streamlined it quite as much as distributed generation queues and management system. Most of the state policies have been driving clean energy, so that's why the focus has been on generation. But after sharing that additional system data, we started to assess some more advanced hosting capacity evaluations, starting to look at sub feeder level. So that's really, instead of just a capacity for an entire circuit, which is a useful metric to get an idea of more so where not to go because a circuit is constrained, but just because a circuit has capacity doesn't mean a specific site on a circuit has capacity. So of course we started to dabble in additional granularity in stage 3, stage 3.5. We started to hear some use cases that other maps would be useful. So really the start was focused on PV, solar generation. Those were how the state policy goals originally started. But soon enough, we started to hear about energy storage, so batteries that wanted to connect to the grid or electric vehicle systems, charging locations, and all these different stakeholders, again, wanted a map to help them site these locations better. So we began to roll out additional maps. So we now have an EV load serving capacity map, which is a general capacity per feeder or circuit of how much additional load could be served. And then energy storage maps. This is really very similar to the solar maps, except it's tailored slightly to energy storage assets, which operate slightly differently, since obviously they could charge from the grid or discharge onto the grid, so acting as both a generation and a load. So now we have basically 3 different maps that share similar but slightly different information. And then this latest stage, we have added even additional granularity to now the point where we're sharing hosting capacity data per individual 3-phase line. So now if an interested developer or a customer wants to know how much capacity is available at their exact site that they're considering, they can get that information rather than just seeing one value for an entire circuit and just having to guess how much capacity is actually at their site. If we go to the next slide, please. So I sort of alluded to this, why we have multiple maps. Just as the screenshot at the top here is showing just the tabs available on our system data portal. So like I mentioned, we do have some non-map data like company reports. The hosting capacity maps and the load serving capacity maps are really the most robust maps. But there are some other things like locational system relief values or where to site DERs. We do have a map that shows that for DERs competing in that market. We also have some cost sharing data. So in New York State, there are some cost sharing laws that allow DG developers to sort of sit in a queue for a large system upgrade so that they don't have to be the forebearer of all that cost. They can split that cost if there's enough interest in that particular location, that they can split the cost among multiple developers. So we share that information, basically all pieces of information that would be helpful to a developer trying to site a distributed energy resource. We do also share non-wire alternatives information and some previous data on pass and fail metrics from our interconnection evaluation, which we call a CSER in New York State. So really PV hosting capacity map, as you can imagine, is targeted for solar developers. ESS hosting capacity map for energy storage system developers. Thinking more standalone storage, we do have a lot of applications where it's solar paired with storage, but many times the storage is DC coupled, so it's really kind of behind the PV and just meant to supplement the PV generation, and it can't actually discharge directly onto the grid, and it can't charge at all. So slightly different use case. The ESS hosting capacity is really a standalone storage directly connected to the grid. And then EV load serving capacity, this is really for EV chargers, and really sort of any load based resource. Of course, with each of these maps, there are specific analysis criteria. So when we calculate hosting capacity, the way in which we calculate those numbers is we have to identify how that asset will operate. So PV-based assets will operate a certain way. They will generate within a certain number of hours of the day, certain daytime hours. So the analysis we perform reflects that operation. With energy storage systems, right, you could technically discharge whenever you wanted to if you had the charge available. And you could charge from the grid whenever you wanted to as well. So that map reflects those operational scenarios. EV load serving capacity. This is a very high level map, so this is not currently very granular. It's really at the feeder level, mainly because load-based analysis, at least right now, we don't have a great queue management system. So sharing that really granular data when you can't really see what else is going on for other applications that may be in queue, the value just isn't quite there, and stakeholders haven't asked for it or pushed for it quite as much as the other generation-based maps. So really those varying levels of granularity are probably the biggest differences in the value these maps can provide. So nodal level data, really data per three-phase line, that's extremely detailed, right? Like if you are an interested solar developer and you have maybe a few sites in mind, you could see exactly which site has the most capacity based on the hosting capacity values of that line. We even share hosting capacity values per metric. So how much of a resource you can install before you cause a thermal violation, or how much of a resource you can install before you cause an overvoltage violation. And really this gives the developers an idea of what sort of grid side upgrades they might need to pay for if they were to exceed that amount. So maybe a thermal value is, if you exceed that with your site size, it's probably going to be a larger upgrade cost. You're likely going to need to change out a device or maybe some conductors, whereas under voltage or over voltage, maybe you can just install some voltage regulation equipment. So really this additional granularity, now breaking it down to even individual analysis types, it just helps the developers get a better idea of what's going to be in store if they do submit an application for an interconnection. The EV capacity map, you don't really have that luxury quite yet, since it's really just capacity per circuit. So at a high level, it tells you where to go, where not to go. But this is definitely an area that we see expanding quite a bit in the next couple of years as we gain more interest and electrification becomes more prominent. If we go to the next slide, please. So just benefits of the map in general. So there's really both internal and external benefits. So external benefits, this is public facing. So we have a lot of users, particularly of the EV map, or excuse me, the PV maps. In general, it does result in higher success rates of DG interconnection rather than getting a bunch of applications for areas of the grid that have no capacity. And then maybe you need to do an engineering analysis only to find out that it's going to cost several millions of dollars and the developer doesn't go through with it. The areas that they are proposing to site are generally better because they have this information exposed to them. They can make more informed decisions. It can also give them a general idea of what's in store, like I mentioned, based on the type of criteria that might be violated, right? The magnitude of the upgrades, maybe they do have an appetite to pay a certain amount for a type of upgrade, so they know, okay, I'm willing to look for an area with hosting capacity that has high thermal levels, but maybe I'm not too concerned with overvoltage or something like that. Also, just a general understanding of the entire system. We've definitely have, even this is really applicable for just any siting, EV chargers, really anything at all. We have some relatively recent laws about school bus depots wanting to electrify, or goals to have all school buses electric by, I think it's 2035, 100% of school buses. So even just school districts trying to figure out where they are connected to the system, right? Really, this is a public-facing portal that shows the entire grid, at least the distribution system, and it's proven to be pretty useful just in understanding where customers are topologically in the system. Gets them an idea of what substation they're served from. There's even some relatively new laws that allow for DER aggregation to compete in markets, kind of functioning as one. And really the only way to know what market or what rate you'd be getting as a DER, if competing in that market, is you need to know what transmission node you're connected to. So we've added that data to our maps. Really anything to help the public and these developers get at data more easily rather than needing to contact the utility. If it's not confidential or sensitive, then we try to make it available on this map. Internal benefits as well. Like, we do have internal teams that review DG applications or even electric vehicle applications. Like I mentioned, school districts are starting to get an idea of, okay, we need to electrify, what's it going to take? There are a lot of internal EV teams that have conversations using our maps. It's just helpful to have a visual aid while talking to customers. Having that geographic reference, seeing the topology, seeing what line you're served from, substation, it really just helps with that conversation and understanding. It also gives you an idea of, for at least the PV and energy storage maps, we do share how much DG is currently connected and how much DG is in queue ahead of you, or really at that time. So developers can get an idea of, okay, although there's a lot of capacity on this circuit or this part of the circuit, there's 10 megawatts already in queue. So maybe I want to look somewhere else because that might get eaten up before my application gets approved. So really helps facilitate those conversations, just generally better understanding of customers. They're more informed. So we see benefits both internal and external, and we try to advertise it as much as possible. Go to the next slide, please. So as you can imagine, the system data portal, right, it's been in the works for several years, and it does take a bit to maintain and keep fresh. Like, we do have a commitment, regulatory commitments to update these maps at least annually. Like I mentioned, the joint utilities, there is a specific working group that's basically dedicated to making sure the system data portal gets maintained by all the utilities. We have stakeholder engagement sessions, so we commit to certain deliverables. We all agree to the roadmap and what features we're going to implement, and all that does take time. At a minimum, we update all the maps annually. So that is a full system refresh for National Grid. We have about a little over 2,000 distribution circuits in our territory. We do perform full analysis of all those circuits, which includes quite a bit of work from engineering resources. So that update takes quite some time, but there are some other data points that are updated more frequently, such as the DG connected and DG in queue data that's updated on a monthly basis, mainly because that data changes more frequently. We want to make sure it's advertised to developers as quickly as possible. Circuits that have changed in topology or have had greater than 500 kilowatts of new DG added, we do perform a reanalysis at the 6-month interval rather than waiting for the full year. Basically, any metric or property that may have changed about a circuit, if it's significant enough, we will do a reanalysis because it kind of invalidates the previous data, and we don't want to give or misconstrue capacity of our system. So we try to update it as much as possible. But I will admit it's pretty time intensive. It takes several engineering resources, several months to do. For the full update, the monthly updates takes a few hours, but this does vary from utility. At least at National Grid, we've spent a lot of time trying to automate some of these processes, cleaning up our data sources to minimize how much manual work we need to do. However, in addition to all that, there are various software products that we do use to make this happen. So we obviously use electric network modeling software and power flow software. We use SIME at National Grid. There are some other utilities in New York that use OpenDSS. It's an open source software. I think there's a few other softwares in use. It's sort of agnostic, right? That's just the system you do your analysis in. Ultimately, what you post on the map is the output data. However, the map itself is an Esri platform, so we use ArcGIS Online. It's my understanding that if you have an enterprise license, it doesn't actually cost more to deploy this portal. It's included, but you do need your own IT infrastructure to host it. So we do have several servers that are used to host this portal. Obviously, that costs some IT resources to maintain and just keep running. And we also use an EPRI software called EPRI Drive. So it stands for Distribution Resource Integration and Value Estimation. This helps us perform the hosting capacity analysis in a slightly more automated way. And that does have some licensing costs associated with it. And with that, we can go to the next slide. So the future of the system data portal, like I mentioned, pretty much everything on the system data portal has been developed for a very specific use case or use cases and based on stakeholder needs. So really that original inception of the joint utilities, trying to meet that those REV goals, to meet clean energy goals of the state, has, we released an initial map. We began to have stakeholder engagement sessions where we would hear how they'd use it, what would be more useful, what we should remove, things like that. And we host at least 2 stakeholder engagement sessions a year. It can vary. The stakeholders base themselves can vary based on map, right? Obviously, generation based maps like PV and energy storage, typically DG developers. Electric vehicle load serving capacity map, that's an entirely different group of people. It could be EV installers or school districts in some instances like this. So it's very specific, and we try to meet each of their needs as they put it forth to us. We discuss as a JU, determine the implementation plan. Some of the most recent discussions on these maps has been focused on the different operational scenarios for DERs. So what that means is, like how I mentioned with energy storage, that map sort of reflects an energy storage system operating unconstrained, right? You can charge from the grid whenever you want. You can discharge to the grid whenever you want. However, New York State, there are some other working groups among the utilities that are trying to establish a schedule for when energy storage systems should operate to result in the least negative impact to the grid, right? You'd want to discharge at your peak loading period, and you'd want to charge at your minimum loading period. If we can set forth some schedules and have interconnection policies in place to hold developers and these sites accountable, then we would want to perform hosting capacity to reflect those scenarios. We wouldn't want to show hosting capacity values that reflect a scenario that they're not going to operate their system at. It's not very useful. So that's been a big topic of discussion lately. Really, any flexible connections, like if a site is able to be curtailed, if maybe the output is too high, or maybe demand response type programs, we'd want to try to reflect that in the maps so that all users in any of their specific use cases can get some value in the data the map is portraying. They vary in maturity. As I mentioned, all these maps, the PV hosting capacity and energy storage hosting capacity maps are the most robust. EV has been at a high level thus far, mainly because it hasn't had that much attention, but it has been under discussion of how we can make that more useful. There is some discussion of new technologies and how that's going to impact these maps like AMI and ADMS. Really, the main thing that I could probably mention about these is, although it may not really change the map itself, it would probably help us have more accurate electric system models. So at least at National Grid, we're in the process of rolling out AMI. And once we have all of that data available, presumably we would be able to do more accurate load flow calculations, account for more scenarios. So overall, improving the accuracy in the data that we're sharing on the map. And then also very near-term development specific to the EV maps. We're actually retiring that map because we've heard that one of the most prominent use cases right now is electrification should not be limited to just transportation electrification. There has been an increased interest, especially in New York State, to understand building electrification and where the grid is ready to support an all-electric building or housing complex. EV maps in their current capacity kind of just show a summer view, right? That's the most constrained part of or really the most constrained time of the year for our system. We typically see summer peaks. There are a few winter peaking systems, but predominantly summer. But if electrification of buildings is really mostly going to impact winter months, where now heating is being performed by electric technologies, the load in the winter is going to increase dramatically. So you'd want a winter view. So really, the new proposed map is an electrification map where you have both a winter capacity and a summer capacity. That way we're kind of meeting two use cases in one. Users that are interested in understanding their system's constraints in the summer, because that's when they're going to see the most use, could look at the summer view. Whereas building electrification, stakeholders trying to get an idea of where there's capacity for electric heating could look at the winter view. And really, you can see this in the same map. This is kind of accomplished with layers, different layers to the map. But that's something that we're actually planning on rolling out in the next 2 months. And that did result from an order that was sent from the PSC in New York State. So that's a pretty new development. As with all the other maps, once we release that map, there will be a stakeholder engagement session where we try to figure out what the next use cases will be. And we'll see how that map is useful and how we can make it even more useful in the future. So those are just a few of the things that we have in store, really mostly driven by stakeholders, so it's hard to commit. And as I mentioned, the JU, the joint utilities, we do have, we drive for consistency, so we kind of run everything by one another to make sure that all the maps are semi-aligned. So all of the feedback we get does go through that group first. And with that, we can go to the next slide, really just a closing slide for some more information. So I would encourage anyone that wants to know more information. There is a Joint Utilities of New York website. There is a specific page on hosting capacity. It has a lot of our previous stakeholder session slideshows on there. There are links to all the utilities hosting capacity maps and system data portals on there, as well as some documentation that explains the values we share, how we calculate them, how they tie to our impact analyses in the interconnection process, stuff like that. So I definitely encourage you to check that out. And with that, I guess I'll pause for any questions. I think I might see some in the chat, but
yeah, thanks, Alex. Thanks for the excellent presentation. This was exactly the right level of detail for me, at least, to understand what you're doing and the type of maps that you have available. Like I mentioned, we're working through this in Michigan right now, so I'm really excited to dig into some questions here. I do say that there are at least a couple questions in the chat. One asking to send a link to the page with the maps, if you're able to do that at some point. But I actually would love to start with a question. One thing that we've encountered while trying to require publishing of these similar types of hosting capacity maps is some pushback on the concerns about privacy or physical security by sharing this level of nodal data. But I heard you say, I actually wrote it down, that you said the more granular the data, the better at one point in your presentation. So how did you get there? What is the how do you get over those potential physical security concerns?
That's a good question. Definitely a delicate subject. I think there are a lot of utilities that feel differently about this. It seems like most of the focus, at least in New York, has been on minimizing how much we share data from the substation up. So the distribution system generally, we have decided is more or less safe to share information about, right? Anybody could theoretically go map it out if they wanted to. You can see it on Google Maps. Although if you get a sense of topology, I guess you could inherently identify weaknesses of the system or vulnerabilities. But if you obfuscate the substations and you don't have any connections from substations to other substations, generally the thought is, okay, you can't make any orchestrated target that would take out the system in a large manner. At National Grid, we do share at least a blue box of where our substations are. There are some other utilities in New York that have disagreed with that, and they have removed those. Our argument was, if you look on the map and you have really any idea of a grid at all, and you see several circuits all originating from the same place, it's probably a substation. So we've decided that if there's a blue box there or not, if you can turn on satellite view and see a fence and what seems to be some electrical equipment, so a bad actor would figure that out anyway. So we've decided to just leave it on the maps. But we do not post anything really above the substation level, no connections above that. For that reason, we are still concerned about security. And I think, to be completely honest, it's probably a product of utility experience. If utilities have had bad experience with physical security or maybe some potential attacks, then they'll probably be more concerned. National Grid has thus far been pretty good, and our system's been secure. But I think it's probably unique to specific utilities in the area. Con Ed, who is the utility in New York City, they're the most sensitive, and they hide the most, I would say, of the New York utilities.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that. That makes a lot of sense. And thanks for putting the link in the chat as well. I'm sure that'll be useful for people. Ryan, I saw your question in the chat. Do you want to come off mute and ask the question?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I can't turn my screen on today. That's why I put it in there, but happy to. So Alex, I appreciated your presentation a lot. My name is Ryan Cheney. I'm with the North Carolina Utilities Commission. And I saw how there's sort of, one, I really liked the sort of the maturity phases you talked through that you all went through. In North Carolina, Duke Energy is about to release their hosting capacity maps. I think it's early next year. And so one thing I'm thinking about is sort of how to evaluate where they are. And so that maturity matrix is a helpful frame. But my question was with regards to the EV maps, and you mentioned, that they're sort of at the highest level right now, and you're maybe starting to see some insights coming from the users. And I'm just curious if you have those insights, or if you could share, how you think the EV maps may be evolving over time from where they are today.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. So I would say the biggest reason the EV maps have not evolved as dramatically as the other hosting capacity maps is probably just because most of the interest in the system data portal has been targeting generation developers. So they are the predominant users of our portal. We hear from them the most when they dislike something or they wish we had more data available to them, because that interconnection process is just more robust, right? We're trying to meet clean energy goals in the state. So there's just been a lot of attention on that. So a lot of the focus, like we've definitely heard like, oh, it'd be great if every map was super granular, but it's the same group, at least at National Grid, that creates all these maps. So we only have the capacity to do so much. So in terms of determining what is the most valuable at this time, a lot of the effort's been focused on the generation-based maps. They've kind of reached a point where there's not that much more data we can provide, to be honest. Like we're basically as granular as we can get. Really the next advancement would be trying to refine our system models to be even more accurate so that the data we do share is closer to what a real interconnection process would be. The EV maps, now that we're creating this new electrification map, I expect just the word to get out there that these maps exist. Probably the biggest hurdle is not many people even knew about these maps. The EV maps, until recently, have predominantly been used internally, just by EV teams trying to get an idea of, like, okay, they hear from a customer that they want to install EV chargers. Our team uses our own maps to review capacity, rather than directing the developers to the maps. So I think it's really just a product of, it hasn't been advertised as much, and therefore we haven't heard about the needs as much. That said, some of the internal users of our EV map have voiced that there's not enough granularity in them. And usually this comes out when a problem arises, right? Someone tells a customer that there is capacity, and then it turns out when they submit a load request and a formal study was done, there isn't capacity and they have to pay a certain amount for an upgrade, and it catches people off guard. And then we end up hearing about it like, oh, why didn't your map tell us that? And then we have to explain, well, we have a whole roadmap for development. We do agree, more granularity is better. There's just only so much we can do. It requires a lot of resources to develop a map with that much detail. So we just haven't had time to focus on it. So we are kind of just telling people, if you do have these concerns, use the map, send us emails. Like, there's contact information on all these pages. These stakeholder engagement sessions that the joint utilities hosts, we invite people to those. We just need to hear it in that sort of venue. A lot of times these one-off utility requests, we'll voice them among the JU, but it doesn't hit as heavily as when you're on a stakeholder engagement session and you have the PSC there as well. And everybody's starting to hear like, oh, the utilities should do this to their maps. It's has a lot more weight to it in that venue. And the DG developers have learned that, and that's how they've gotten things accomplished on the system data portal. I think the EV map just hasn't gotten there yet, but I do expect it to come in the future. I'd expect the maps to align very closely. Hard to say when, but I imagine when you can see all three maps side by side, you would wonder why the map you use isn't as detailed as the others. So
Mhm.
I expect those questions to come.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, that's really helpful context and insight. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Of course.
Yeah, agreed. Kara, I see you asked in the chat, can you speak to the drivers of increased functionality? What has been the motivating factor of this increased functionality? Alex, are you able to speak to that?
Yeah, definitely. I'd say the answer to that is very similar to what I just stated. The drivers for increased functionality are really from users of the map expressing that they'd like to see a specific piece of data of made available, or they would say, you know, all I was able to see was capacity at the whole circuit level, and I thought there was capacity, but when I applied for my project, it turns out there wasn't. So really, we hear about it through these stakeholder engagement sessions, and then the JU kind of convenes at the end, and we discuss, okay, how can we make it happen? Do we have the resources? Do we have the time? And we build it into our roadmap. And then we do eventually commit, like, okay, in 2024, we are committing to release this additional functionality. And then we release it, meet with the stakeholders again, get their feedback. And oftentimes they're very appreciative of it because we are doing it because they ask. Very rarely do we come up with the ideas on our own and we say, we're just going to do it. Like, pretty much all these system data portal maps were developed because someone asked for it. And yeah, I mean, they're all good reasons.
That's great. Yeah. It's great to be doing something that you know is useful, right? And making sure that the updates that you're making are actually wanted and useful. I have another question. So for states that are considering requirements for publishing maps similar to these, like speaking maybe to the Public Service Commission, in states, could you point out any common pitfalls or examples of things maybe to avoid, or maybe specific things that you would recommend, speaking from your perspective as a utility who's already been through this process?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say, although I don't know of many immediate pitfalls that come to mind, like, I think we've gone about it pretty sensibly. Like, I think with that customer-centric focus, like the user-based focus, think about what the stakeholders want. That has been, I think, a tried and true method. Like, we have conducted surveys in the past where we'd get just a ranking of use cases and functionality from stakeholders, and then we'd use that ranking to try to inform what we should do. Right? We only have so many resources. We only have so much funding to put toward work like this. So we can't get it all done. So I think our biggest successes have been keeping that in mind, just trying to help the developer. I would say maybe one pitfall is when you do have many maps, many of the maps were created based on a specific order, or something that came out that the PSC said, we would like you to create this map. So that map is then produced on whatever timeline the order specifies, and then the refresh cycle usually keeps with that same timeline. So for this new electrification map, we have to release it by January. I would expect a annual refresh to be done in January. However, the hosting capacity maps, the PV hosting capacity maps, that original order had us deliver that map in October, so by October 1st. When you have many maps that share a lot of the same data but have different update cycles, sometimes you can get inconsistencies with the data, mainly just because, like an example, for instance, would be a substation is retired or a specific feeder is retired. One map might have it, the other map does not, because that other map has been updated. That has led to some questions. I think the solution there is try to align your update cycles as much as possible. So that's actually something we have just proposed as a joint utility group this past year. We used to have the PV hosting capacity map update in October, the energy storage map updated in April, and it was just this weird back and forth 6-month cycle where they were never perfectly in sync. So this year we said, or we updated PV this last October, and now we've committed to update both PV and energy storage again in April. That way they're on the same cycle, although it's a bit more work because we have to update everything for PV again at the 6-month mark. We feel like it'll help us in the long run just for consistency of data and maintaining our data sets across the maps. So that's probably the one thing that I have felt personally, just with that data inconsistency.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's really that. I assume it probably reduces work for you too, to just be able to do them all at once and just use one set of data to be able to update all the maps at one time. So it's just more efficient. That makes sense. I know you have to go at 4. We have only 2 minutes left. Is there one quick question that anybody wants to fit in the last 2 minutes? If not, thank you so much, Alex, for coming in and talking through this. I think this is a really good example of what these maps could look like. And I know I learned a lot for how to bring this to Michigan, at least. So I hope some of the other commissioners and commission staff have gotten some good insight out of this as well. Really appreciate you taking the time to come and present this. Yeah, keep up the good work. I'm really looking forward to seeing the updates for the energy storage maps. I think you're definitely on the right track there for taking into account those operation profiles. So thanks for taking the time, Alex.
Thank you all. Take care.
All right, Danielle, I know you have the next section here.
I have a good segue for us, is what I have.
Good.
So Robert, if you could go to the next slide, one more, thank you. So very apropos, I'm very happy to share that a presentation I gave to you all this summer has resulted in final products. As I mentioned, I think in July, NARUC, with support from multiple offices at the Department of Energy, convened a series of workshops to develop a grid data sharing framework, which would provide a structure for commissions to be able to have the kind of information gathering discussions and conversations with the utilities and stakeholders that could result in things like the hosting capacity maps that you saw today from National Grid. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on it today because next week we will be hosting a public webinar to go through the grid data sharing framework and playbook and use cases in much greater detail, but I did want to at least flag it for everybody. And I just put the web page on which you can find these resources into the chat, though it looks like it didn't hyperlink. And then I put in a registration link for the December 6th public webinar, where you can hear us walk through all of the different components in some level of detail. That said, I was going to share with you what has been produced right now. So as I said, the framework itself is intended to help utility commissions and interested parties really identify what the questions are that you have about grid data sharing, and provides a structure for elevating concerns that might be raised, like security concerns or privacy concerns or cost concerns or counterfactual concerns. What do you not get if you don't release distribution grid related data and information? What are your goals for having additional grid data available? What are the other options that might include or exclude sharing additional grid data? It could be pulling things from different places that already exist and might be semi-publicly available. Lots of different options. So the way that this was structured, there are 7 topics that talk about how you can actually work through those questions. And I can do a quick screen share, I think. Sorry. Here we go. Uh-oh. Okay. Oh, thanks, Robert. Quick screen share. So I'm showing you, here we go. What's the use case? You heard Alex mention use cases a number of times. What are the state's priorities? What are the overarching goals and desires at a state policy and objectives level? What are current practices, requests, and options? How is information shared currently? What are the restrictions on that? If there aren't restrictions, what does that look like? What's the jurisdiction of the commission relative to the utilities and those requesting the data? And then what are desired outcomes for additional grid data sharing? So that's one set of questions, and there are additional sub-questions under each of those. And then another set is around what specific data are being requested by stakeholders, DER developers, others. What would be the potential impacts of sharing those data, and what tactics could be used to mitigate risks and provide the benefits or achieve the desired outcomes. And so the reason I was showing you this in the frame right here is so you know that there's a whole playbook that goes through each of those different triangles and gives you detailed questions. There's also a section that shows how you might consider approaches to decision making, and what some regulatory process challenges, what some data sharing implementation challenges could be, and then different use cases, including one around enabling fleet vehicle electrification, which is what I had shared with you all last time. So this is all now public. There's one other piece that I wanted to show you briefly, which is a summary of state practices. So about a year ago, NARUC and our subcontractors did a bunch of information research, desktop research, to develop a detailed table of what kind of data are available currently, and made some updates to that within the last year. There are 19 states listed and about 40 utilities, and this describes what the grid data proceedings have been, if there have been any, which utilities are covered by those, and links to different hosting capacity maps and different viewers. I will end up updating our New York entry to include the joint utilities link. I think we had different references to the orders, the commission orders, as opposed to the joint utilities themselves. And Commissioner Pertic, Michigan is in here for its various orders. But not the actual maps themselves at this stage, as you referenced earlier. I wanted to give folks the chance to take a look at this. Please send any updated information that you think should be included. We would love to make this a living document. It's not hard for us to update, but you can find some good examples of what's happening in other states, since that's often where we all like to look first. So that was my segue for today, and wanting to let you all know that there are some resources now that did not exist previously to help as you have your own conversations with utilities about what kind of hosting capacity or related information you might want to share.
Thanks, Danielle. This is really good information and really timely. I think there's a lot of people thinking about this right now. And I am always just amazed at the quality and quantity of data that you're able to gather through CPI. You do a fantastic job of getting all of the examples from different states and put them in one place that's really easy for us to reference and use. So thank you for putting these together. I know I and my commission use them all the time, and I'm sure everybody else on this call does as well.
Commissioner Paratek?
Yeah.
This is Milk. Can you hear me? I'm in the car, so sorry for background noise if it exists. I just what if I could take a minute to give a little testimony on Danielle's playbook on grid information sharing. I actually did the I guess it was 2-hour program at NARUC, and it was really great. I just want to say for those who have an opportunity to do it, I would really suggest it. I ended up being, a utility was my role, and we had developers and consumer advocates and the commissions around the table, and we went through this tabletop sort of exercise, and all the issues that kind of you heard from National Grid's presentation kind of surfaced, and we ended up coming up with I think a good compromise approach to data sharing after expressing all the interest. So I just want to commend Danielle and her team for yet another angle, on a subject that allows us, in our positions to really learn and gain a lot of, insights, I think, into these decisions that we have to make. So anyway, really great work, Danielle, to you and your team on that. Thank you for allowing me to provide that, Commissioner Paratek.
Well, thanks, Commissioner Dewitt. I always appreciate your comments. That sounds like a great opportunity.